So we should see a red dot somewhere.
Yep.
Top left.
I'm just waiting for one or two more.
Just a quick reminder, folks, if you're not speaking, kindly mute your mic.
Right, so what do you think, Shay? Should we kick it off and let the rest trickle in?
Yep, sounds good, Willy.
Right, so welcome everyone to our June 2022 DevOps Vancouver Meetup with two exciting and insightful sessions. I'll briefly cover a few housekeeping items. So as you've just noted, this session is being recorded and will be shared on our Meetup YouTube channel in about a month's time. Please mute your microphone during the presentations and remember to unmute for the Q&A, which I always forget. We need your feedback to improve the meetup and your ideas for future sessions. And we have not planned any sessions for July and August to ensure that everyone can enjoy the summer break. So hopefully we'll have a summer soon. In September, we will resume our meetups with an interactive question answer blockbuster digital transformation from on-prem to the cloud with Donovan Brown. It will be a virtual session. And yes, we are having discussions around bringing back in-person meetups combined with the option of attending virtually. So please share your thoughts, concerns, and suggestions for hybrid meetups with us so that we can continue to improve our meetups. And lastly, I've been tidying up my home office and found a few cue cards, coasters, and stickers. So if you need any of these memories, please be interactive today and ping me on Twitter or LinkedIn after the meetup. With that, I'll hand over to Shay to introduce the first session. Shay, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Willy. It brings me great pleasure to introduce two of our speakers today, both of whom are speaking in this new iteration for the first time. Our first session is about the impact and influence of the COVID pandemic on a healthy DevOps mindset. So Thorsten Schaub would be walking us through this presentation, and he has researched the impact of the COVID pandemic on a healthy DevOps mindset. So this is something that has impacted almost all of us in some way, shape, or form. So I really look forward to hearing more about his research. And secondly, we have Brent Reed coming to us from TagTech. And Brent Reed would be talking to us about categories of DevOps-friendly strategies and how the right toolkit can support successful DevOps teams who scale and connect to value streams supporting organizational transformation. All of this sounds like music to my ears. I hope you folks are also as excited as I am to listen to these sessions. And without much further ado, I'll pass it on to Thorsten.
Thank you. I just got to share my screen here. Mind the background and all the additional apps. All right, I'll just kick it off. Yeah, my name's Thorsten Schaub. I am going to be talking about the impact and influence of the COVID pandemic on a healthy DevOps mindset. I really like data. I also like looking at it, diving deep into it. But just specifically for this presentation, there's not a lot of statistics that I'll be throwing at you, basically just so I can talk more about the general outcomes and kind of how the DevOps mindset has shifted because of the COVID pandemic. So from all, I would like to call them technicians around the world. You guys have come from different places, from Canada to South Africa, the United States, Netherlands, India, New Zealand, Portugal, Morocco, Netherlands, United Kingdom, and Brazil as well. So you guys are all over the world, which is fascinating. And kind of helps encompass more of what really DevOps mindset is. So what is the DevOps mindset? As previously seen at the previous slide, it's like Donovan Brown has defined DevOps as the union of people, of process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. And I myself did not know a lot about what the DevOps mindset was when I first delved into this research. I learned about it, then tried to explain it to people and miserably failed. So I realized, well, I really don't know anything about this, so I really need to learn. So apart from Donovan's explanation, I looked further into other definitions and found that, for example, Microsoft Azure defines it as a compound of development and operations, essentially DevOps, as being the union of people, process, and technology to continually provide value to customers, as well as two additional ones as the Amazon Web Services, which is surprising that they had a definition for it, but that's a longer one, so I will not be going over that one. Wikipedia did as well have some definitions, which people love to go to Wikipedia for all sorts of different information. And they just defined it as DevOps is characterized by key principles: shared ownership, workflow, automation, and rapid feedback. Ultimately, I like that Donovan's explanation the most because it really defines the core principles of what DevOps is, rather than the processes and kind of just a dictionary definition of what it is. DevOps is essentially a focus on development and operations. And by doing my research, I found that the reason why DevOps is so effective is because it actually works on two opposing fronts. That developers are motivated by changing servers as much as they can in order to add features, and that's how they get rewarded. When on the operation side of things, you want to keep the lights in the servers on. And how to do that is to limit the amount of changes and added features you do. So that's a little bit of a hard one to tackle, is how do you really make that healthy if they're actually essentially working against each other? So as defined, is success is the biggest deterrent of DevOps. If it's not broken, why would you fix it? Well, that is the old school way of thinking, and DevOps tries to break down that barrier. I really like the book by Adam Grant. It's called Originals. There's a quote from it that I'd like to bring in is, psychologists have identified there are two routes to achievement, conformity and originality. Conformity means kind of following the crowd down conventional paths and maintaining the status quo. And originality is taking the road less traveled, championing a set of novel ideas and to kind of go against the grain, but ultimately make things better. And when connecting that with DevOps, I find the DevOps culture seems to focus more on originality, as originality itself starts with creativity. So conformity is the old way of thinking, the old school way, and originality is the DevOps mindset, which is depicted in this diagram above. So the past is essentially the project mindset, which is restricted collaboration and sort of creates silos of communication, where there's a tendency for developers and testers to kind of move on to the next project once they've finished their part of the first one. And developers themselves are not allowed to step into the computer room, and they could only dream to get anywhere near a production server, I suppose. And when operations did have questions or needed help from engineers who built the solution they developed, they often realized that engineers had already left the building. They're not there anymore. They're already moved on to their next project. But in today's world, or today's product mindset of DevOps, which is the diagram below, it's a healthy DevOps mindset that is not a job description, nor some silver bullet that you can buy and install. It's essentially all about people who thrive on continuous feedback, innovation, and improvement to deliver things quicker, better, and continuously to delight other people, specifically their customers, to always bring value. So processes, products, and machines are important servants and enablers. However, without people, they always remain uninstalled, unconfigured, and essentially unused. And from doing my DevOps research and kind of what a DevOps mindset is, I picked up on the customer obsession point of things. And it seemed DevOps always tries to bring value directly into the customer's hands, as this is by Martin Woodward, who emphasized this. I will not be reading these out, as I know people can read, so I will not reading them off the presentation, but I just wanted to focus on the second one pertaining to myself, as looking, kind of making a hypothesis from an outside perspective, not being part of DevOps. So I believe that the COVID pandemic for people has created a culture of encouraging maximum production, which indirectly has affected the quality of the production. And what I mean by that is essentially, we are no longer trying to find extra time to do work. We've been creating extra time. So working longer hours, doing more, which is essentially us creating that time. But we need to understand that when we create something, we cannot create something out of nothing. So when we always sacrifice something at the end of the day. So yes, we're creating more time and creating more value and more production, but what are we losing? And that's the emphasis of what this presentation will essentially be about. So to start, overall finding, this was the most important one I myself believe is that the DevOps mindset has shifted its focus away from people and more towards processes and products. As within the research, 74% of, and call me out if I'm wrong, of DevOps technicians, I will be calling them technicians throughout this presentation, 74% agree that there has been a shift in focus away from people and more towards process and products. That's 3/4 of all technicians, which is a substantial amount, which clearly shows that the pandemic has clearly shifted and affected a healthy DevOps mindset. So what has been working well come after the pandemic? Because some things do work better and some things don't, but what has worked well? Well, the focus shifting to process and product is not necessarily a bad thing. If you look at it positively, DevOps has shifted more towards that, and it may be uncertain on like what that affects, but production essentially has sped up and thereby improving the productivity and efficiency of its systems. And moving to the next one is automation. I've learned that automation is a key point within DevOps, and the pandemic has opened the doors to essentially remote work that will never go away from now on, thereby shifting a lot of the businesses to adopt a hybrid or full-time work from home model. And this environment fosters a culture of automation, which kind of increased the use of various tools, also giving technicians more time to experiment. And within DevOps, experimentation is key. So these are two graphs that the first one is automation, 95%. So if we look at it as, are we relying more or less on automation? Well, 95% of technicians agree that we are relying more on automation following the pandemic. So higher reliance on automation has affected our capability to experiment more. Automation essentially also replaces repetitive functions and tasks, but also impacts the creativity, which I'll be speaking about later. And the second graph is, are we experimenting more or less? And 62% feel they are experimenting more, and experimenting far more, which may also have to do with essentially the effect of being able to automate more often, which leaves us with more time to experiment and test. And the pandemic has essentially shifted to a culture of working more, thereby affecting our willingness to experiment. So following adoption, there's adoption is key within DevOps, but mainly what has worked well with adoption is that the remote work has kind of helped improve the adoption and maturation of DevOps practices by the means of essentially making work more visible. And certain aspects of the DevOps mindset have sprout where others have been neglected. And moving into collaboration. Collaboration is important. It ties into communication, but collaboration on its own directly seems to have affected team distribution. There's quicker iteration of products. There's more integration. There's continuous deployment. And additionally, knowledge sharing has become easier and more frequent. And this ties back into shifting towards the focusing on process and products rather than people. And communication on its own has just become simpler, faster, and there's a far more abundance of information and sharing going on with all the tools that we have now. So now I've covered what's worked, but what has not worked in this realm of DevOps? Well, the focus shifting away from people essentially starts to neglect interpersonal relationships, neglects the unique conversations we have with each other, and we are relying too much on production. And automation was affected because why is it negative in this realm? Because automation has increased to become so abundant that it's becoming to interfere with the quality of our production. And as I mentioned previously, has impacted our creativity. But why has it impacted our creativity? It's because automation, although it's a great thing to have with growing technology and tools, it can essentially interfere with creativity and experimentation. So automating too much is not the solution, but automating at a sufficient rate in order to optimize quality processes and production is the goal for a healthy DevOps mindset. Collaboration has been affected in the sense that although, as I mentioned, that information sharing is easier and quicker, DevOps essentially faces the issue of silos. So far too many detached teams. Collaboration is happening within separate groups without having any efficient network of exchanging information. And communication has also been affected. So it has affected communication in different avenues, from the effectiveness of communication to kind of rather more so have frequency of communication. And communication seems to be constant, but that does not necessarily mean there's value in it. And apart from what has worked, I wanted to focus on that culture. Culture has not worked so well as it's shifted within DevOps. So DevOps has shifted into a different culture of work ethic, where our expectations are much higher. People are working far more, and essentially the focus has been taken away from people. And I'll be diving into this much further later on into this presentation. So the focus here is to kind of break down the barriers and foster transparency. So unfortunately, remote work, as I previously mentioned, has fostered silos of communication. So here's a stat from the research: is there were 67% of technicians that feel that they're working more collaboratively with others, but it's almost 100%, but 98% of all technicians feel they are working more independently. And working alone independently is a silo within itself. But this is not necessarily the worst thing, because it can empower individuals to fail more, but likewise, it can also encourage them to fail less. But why so? Well, when we are working independently, our failure seems to be directly predicated on our own success. Therefore, we don't want to fail, meaning we are essentially competing. We want to deliver the best value we can. And if we work by ourselves, the only way to do that is to not fail. But when working together, our failure seems to be predicated on our collective success. Therefore, we are more willing to fail for the benefit of improving as a team and providing value. Meaning, instead of competing, we're now collaborating. And DevOps essentially wants to do the opposite of silos. We want to eliminate silos and encourage a network of ideas and collaboration. And this ties back into the issue of ad hoc conversations. We want to reduce ad hoc conversations and essentially focus more on planned collaboration with the intention of providing value to our end users. Second focus is embracing failure, because failure is very important within DevOps. Without failure, there's no creation, and without failure, there's no innovation. So the DevOps mindset culture emphasizes that it is important to fail. We need to be empowered to fail more and be less afraid and essentially become comfortable to fail. A good metaphor I'd like to point out to kind of describe everything is, just imagine a 1,000-piece puzzle. And we've all done puzzles. So out of all the 1,000 pieces, you will always be testing a piece. You always try to fit this one with this one. It may not look the same, but you always try and test a piece, and you most likely fail the first time. So it is important to identify that without failure, without the trial and error of a puzzle, you cannot complete the puzzle. Because I've never met anybody that has magically figured out a puzzle without making one mistake. And so secondly, the DevOps mindset after the pandemic has essentially empowered technicians to fail more. And here's why, is because disruptions, although maybe bad, have essentially caused a lot of failures. Where expected successes were also failing more often, thereby failure became more acceptable and more focused on understanding and learning how to take our failures and essentially move forward. So with the pandemic and remote work comes disruptive learning, but that essentially creates more acceptance of failure. And additionally, I'd like to add to this is that due to remote work, 54% of DevOps technicians said that they're actually more comfortable making mistakes from home. But why? And I really like this is because it's a perceived psychological safety at home. You're in your own space. Nobody's watching over your shoulder. We're being less micromanaged. Essentially, we're feeling less watched. We're in a safe space to fail. So overall, there's time and opportunity in this. Since there's more time to experiment or look for alternatives, there's also more opportunities to be able to fail. So with the work from home model, on average, 92 minutes are being saved a day from our commute time. So these 92 minutes on average are almost 20% of a full working day can be utilized to experiment, fail, and innovate. The last focus is essentially on overall, how has the hybrid office and remote work, how has that shifted and affected the DevOps mindset? Well, the pandemic has impacted not only the building blocks, dynamics, but also the culture of the DevOps and its technicians. Although now production is at an extraordinary high, allowing for more experimentation, which is then followed by automation, the process in which we produce has been essentially impacted. We're shifting away from people, which always has an impact on culture, has an impact on our communication, and also indirectly affects our processes in the long term. So from the survey, what has worked well with remote work? Well, there's more flexibility in our work. There's more time to learn and experiment, limited distractions. There's better work-life balance, which I a little bit disagree with, which I will elaborate on later towards the end, and why I feel there's not a better work-life balance. There's more autonomy to essentially do what you'd like, and it is easier and quicker to collaborate with others. But what has not worked well with remote work? Well, there's a lack of interpersonal engagement, which means there's less trust, and it's much harder to work with newer team members. We have longer working hours, which is essentially expected now, and it's been normalized, which is the part of where I talked about how it's not a better work-life balance. It's because now we're expected to work more, and it's been normalized. So if we don't do it, we kind of feel bad. So it's characterized that it is harder to switch off, essentially. And there is much more silos of communication with remote work. And to focus on the 3 points that I have on the slide specifically, longer work hours. So if there's been a tremendous shift towards process and production, and the DevOps culture has focused more on working more, and more, which essentially means that quantity has overtaken quality. Remote work in itself, businesses themselves, apart from DevOps, are adopting a work from home model, which COVID has shown has worked, but there are challenges that are faced. There's essentially consensus feeling of being able to fail more, though, within this remote environment. As 54% of the DevOps technicians said that they're more comfortable making mistakes from home. And I previously explained why. It's that psychological safety of I'm happy here, I'm safe, I can fail, and nobody's going to judge me. And to the last point, with our new technologies, remote work, the only way we can really communicate with another is meetings, video calls, quick Teams messages, or whatever tools a set team is using. There needs to be management around that. So although meetings are occurring much more smoothly, it is causing a saturated influx of meetings, which influences kind of the continuous context switching. And 60% of technicians actually agreed that they feel they are context switching much more often. And 90% of them also feel that there are more meetings, and 64% feel the meetings are shorter. So the shorter the meetings are, there's more time to have more meetings. Now, are these meetings really bringing value is the real question. So in order to challenge that, there might be something where we need meeting etiquette. So we start on time, you end on at a certain time, no matter how much information has been exchanged. And the biggest one for me personally is cameras, because cameras boost interpersonal reaction. It's like when you're in the office with someone, you would not put your hand over your face. You would not put a paper in front of your face. You look people in the eye, and the interpersonal interaction kind of thrives on that. So having cameras on is very important, although I understand it may be uncomfortable for a lot of people, which is understandable, but this may help boost the interpersonal interaction that is lacking from the DevOps mindset moving post-pandemic. So now I just like to focus on kind of the challenges. What does all this mean? What challenges do we face? So the shift in the DevOps culture has kind of created unrealistic expectations. So we've adopted, fixed base stations have been adopted, and larger workload is normalized. Technicians are actually starting their days earlier and also ending their days much later. So 64% agree that they start their day earlier, and 62 agree that they're starting their days later. And of the ones that start earlier, 70% of them actually also start their day later. So you can see that saved commute time essentially is just being spent to work more. So trying to focus, that is essentially the focus on process and production rather than people. And 45 of technicians are essentially creating a negatively balanced work-life balance. And that's where I mentioned that I don't agree that the work-life balance is better, because we are just substituting the time we're saving to work more. And that's not healthy in the long run. And on the second point, another challenge we face is improved efficiency means faster production. Although a good thing, it has a negative effect and kind of imbalances our work-life relationship. So technicians, as previously mentioned, on average save 92 minutes a day, which is used to work more. So apart from the 51% that agree that they're working more on their safe commute time, 28% of the ones that say they may be spending that time, with family, friends, they also agree that they're spending that time working more. So it's more than 51% essentially that are spending more of their time working rather than actually fostering a work-life balance. And on another bit is the tools that we're using are now allowing us to communicate faster. We are experiencing and expecting more frequent deliveries. So as there's been a shift towards processes of production, a DevOps culture of working more and more has been created, which essentially creates faster communication and increases ad hoc conversations, or essentially not valuable ad hoc conversations, which essentially also impacts and affects our context switching. The more we do it, the worse our production will become. And lastly, the importance is essentially, how do we solve this? Well, the importance is to evaluate and try to improve ad hoc communication. And how can that be done? Well, there's 3 steps that seem the most probable. Is first, you create your thought or idea. Then with yourself, you evaluate what is worth communicating and what is not. And then you would go forth and you would deliver and collaborate with your fellow teammates. They deliver the information, collaborate, come up with ideas, and that way we can kind of optimize our ad hoc kind of communication, because ad hoc is not essentially bad. It's just how we are using it. It predicates whether it's good or not. Now, there may be challenges, but there's always opportunities when we figure out how this DevOps mindset has shifted. There's opportunities with remote work. There's opportunities following the COVID pandemic. So I'd like to mainly focus on that saved time, or that creating time rather than finding time. So what can we do with the time saved? We can channel creativity. We can seek to fail fast. So more automation, more processes allows us to have more opportunities to fail. The faster we fail, the faster we're able to create value. And essentially, the last step would be then to provide value. And in terms of our time saved, I read a good book written by Daniel Pink. I actually really loved, probably one of the first books I've written from start to end, and I do not like reading books. So it's like rocket science to me. He mentioned in that book is a concept called 20% time. So you spend more time on product innovation, features, plugins, fixes, or additions to what the engineers themselves feel is important to them. So you're essentially, what I feel is there's different ways to look at this 20% time. We can leverage the 20% time, whether that is creating or connecting. So we can create a culture of deliberate intent to connect, regroup, and focus on people. So you spend that 91 minutes that you save a day, that's your 20% time, to reconnect with others, regroup, kind of foster more of an interpersonal interaction. Or another one is meeting-free days, which actually one of the DevOps technicians in this research suggested is that 92 minutes, that 20% time can be used as meeting-free days. On those days, you just focus on process and production because frequent meetings impacts that. Another suggestion would be that with remote work, it has created a lot of missed social opportunities, which is a good metaphor was the water cooler conversation. You bump into someone, you have casual conversations where you just talk about anything that's not work related. So with those missed opportunities, what can individuals do? Well, maybe you meet in person within your nearby area. So you have a colleague that lives close to you. You meet with them in person and you take that 20% time to foster that interpersonal connection. Or you take that 20% time to do other things outside of work, improve your mental health, because 36% of technicians felt that they now have less control over their mental health, which is, although only 1/3 or a little over 1/3, that is still a substantial amount. And lastly, we need to connect and essentially find a way on how to shift DevOps back to people, because that's what's important. 52% of technicians felt more isolated post-pandemic, and only about 19% felt less isolated. So there's definitely a gap and a problem there, but it's an opportunity to find a way on how we can shift back to people. So that lack of interpersonal connections, the technicians have indicated that to improve the effectiveness of communication, having some form of in-person collaboration and kind of more clearly defined meeting objectives and expected outcomes can help foster and shift us back to people, because interpersonal connection can never be replaced. That face-to-face value is always going to be invaluable. We can't get rid of it. So remote work will not solve that problem. And essentially with being remote, we have the tools. We just need to know how to optimize them for kind of getting that shift back to people. So if there's anything you take from this, go find a colleague nearby, have a beer with them, and maybe try to regroup and get back onto know a little bit more about them and kind of just dial back from the work, take that 20% time and improve on yourself. And that's the end of my presentation. What is next from here? Well, I will be releasing a full article after this, kind of diving deeper into the findings, the statistics, and kind of encompassing more of a full written write-up of all the findings and implications on how it has affected a healthy and DevOps mindset. And now you're more than willing to ask any questions. Now the floor is yours. And if nobody has questions, that's okay too.
So I'll ask you a question, Brent. As one of the agents, what do you think of the findings so far? Do you have similar experiences over in Victoria? Or is it just on our side of, well, we actually saw on the map, it's actually a worldwide survey, so it's not just Vancouver, but what's the experience on your side of the small pond, i.e. in Victoria?
Yeah, I would say it's absolutely spot on. And I was just thinking of a question for Thorsten, but that's perfect because I think it's he didn't quote us though. He didn't quote you and I in our book. And so I thought, well, okay, maybe he saw read a little bit. No, I'm just kidding. It's only joking with you. So I love it because the data is showing what we talked about, that healthy mindset. And, people don't, they don't buy processes. People buy products and services. So if we're not trying to build value back to the citizen or the consumer, then we're wasting our time, to be frank, because robots don't buy stuff. Programs don't buy stuff. It's people. So everything we do is people, and I love it because it's absolutely spot on. And I've seen it. We've seen it as well. People will take more time to work because they've got that time, and they're not filling that up with family things or work-life balance. So that's great. Psychological safety, I think, is diminished hugely. I have to say a lot from the fact that you just talk to people. What I'd like to really know is what's the uptake in pharmaceuticals, like to cope. And I don't mean illegal drugs or even those that are legal that maybe are questionable, but I'm talking about things that you need just to cope, and antidepressants and things like that. So excellent. It's spot on. And it's exactly what we see. It may even be worse than we think, not to put some doom on it, but yeah, very good stuff. Thank you so much. It absolutely affirms what we're going to talk about, what's in the book that we've written and what we've seen.
I'm not seeing anything else in chat, but I would just like to share my perspective as well. I absolutely resonated with you, especially that part about starting sooner and ending earlier. It seems like the workday has spread across a longer duration. And yeah, I totally resonated with that comment about the meetings being purposeful as well. So we're totally trying to do that in our organization. And yeah, happy to see your presentation.
Thank you.
So Shay, you actually agreed with starting earlier and starting later. My real question is, how do we stop that? Maybe Thorsten can give us some hint. How do I convince my team not to start earlier and finish later? Continuously. I mean, if it's once in a while, and if you're doing some research or you're kind of fiddling with some cool technology, that's fine. But if it's a trend, how do we stop that?
I'm not sure I have like a really good answer for that, but I recall seeing a meme that said something like, that was essentially like a beacon that went off on somebody's desktop that asked people to log out and take stretch breaks and, or a timely lunch break that seems to often evade us in between meetings.
And Willy, I think I'm the counterexample here, but as leaders modeling that behavior, I think if we as leaders are logging in early and logging out late, even if we're not asking our staff to do that, they will do that. Whereas if we are, as leaders, are consciously saying, you know what, I will start work when work time is appropriate, and I will make sure when it's 4:30 or 5 or whenever the end of my day is, I'll send a message to my team saying, all right, I'm signing off, and not sending emails and other things after that. Modeling those behaviors, I think, is much more effective than anything else we could say or do.
Totally agree with that insight. Do we have any more questions? If not, we'll pass it on to Brent.
I just one quick question for Thorsten. I put my hand up, but I did use the chat, sorry. So Thorsten, when you're going through this with the opportunities, and you made some excellent ones there, is there any references, just like Jens was talking about, in terms of servant leads, setting the example, but were there other suggested things that people can do to improve that work-life balance and to improve the mindset?
Not definitely, not on top of my head though. I mean, I would kind of counteract you and ask you the question is, what within a DevOps mindset, what are the barriers to be able to do or have a work-life balance? Why are we working more? Why are we starting early and ending later? what's the barrier? Is it we can't help ourselves, or is it, yeah, we're just following in leadership footsteps? They're doing it, we're gonna do it. And I know from my experience is having habits can also be bad habits. So once you start doing something for an X amount of time, you just keep doing it. It almost feels not normal to not be doing it, which is like why a lot of people may struggle to, get back into the gym, or kind of that habitual way of doing things is actually really impactful if you think about it. So it's kind of, you need to look at it and document it and focus on it day to day, and really, really tell yourself, don't get up early today. Don't go to work so early. And I don't know, maybe just make it harder for you to sign in. Unplug your entire computer when you just log off the day before. And then you don't want to wake up at 7 a.m. and have to plug all your, your mouse and keyboard in, headphones. You're going to wake up earlier, maybe spend that hour to set it up, but that's healthier than spending that hour working. That's my take on it.
I should remember to give that a shot today after I log off from this meeting. Does not look like there's any more questions on the chat. So to our friends who joined a little bit later, our next speaker is Brent Reed, coming from Tactic, and he's talking to us about categories of DevOps-friendly strategies. Brent.
Okay, I'm just going to set up my screen here. Give me a second because it's slightly off. Okay. And move that here. Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity. Thanks, Willy and team at DevOps Vancouver. I really appreciate the time, and I know we've had some PowerPoint and an awesome presentation. Thorsten, thank you so much for that, because it really sets this up nicely. I won't go into super detail. A lot of this stuff gets technical, and there's probably many of you that know this better than I do. But ultimately, I want to make sure that we cover some of this, and it could be larger conversations later. So feel free, after there'll be information you can use to contact me, and I'll put some things at the chat at the end of this little presentation. So we're going to talk about some DevOps strategies, and it's going to link really nicely to Thorsten's presentation, because it is about the people. The mindset, a healthy mindset, everything else is really about the people. So let's look at a few DevOps strategies that work and what it means. Well, first of all, before I do, just a quick introduction. I've been in Vancouver, Victoria now since 2016 after moving back from Europe. I've worked at different projects all over the world. I've been fortunate with that as well. My last gig before I started Tactic here in Victoria was at Heathrow Airport, where I was head of strategy for what was called Airport Resilience, and was really fortunate to bring in with the innovation team, the first DevOps at Heathrow, connecting and using a lot of the DevOps tools and technologies, but agile and lean practices, discipline agile specifically, along with Scrum and Kanban and others there in business operations. So be able to do that, moving into low code, moving into a little bit of early days of citizen development. So came here in 2016, started up Tactic with the mission really to just how can I help any company, any organization really achieve better success and drive their strategies forward. So with that, COVID came, and a lot of the contracts that I had just stopped because of COVID. So I took the training that we were doing in person and very quickly pivoted over to doing what we basically through virtual training, and working with Project Management Institute, who acquired Discipline Agile in 2018. What's really interesting is that we've grown with that. So we're training students all over the world, doing coaching, and we're also one of 4 in the world Discipline Agile authorized consulting partners, besides a premier training partner. Okay, that's enough about us. But the cool thing is we're right here and we're in Victoria, so it's kind of neat to be local in that respect. So first of all, I know we've had a definition of DevOps, and that's great because we're going to ask a question around that. But before we get into strategies, we need to think a little bit about not only a definition of DevOps, but why disciplined DevOps or using DevOps out there. What are the benefits? And ultimately, it's because there are benefits there. We know there's lots of metrics to show that, lots of data. Thorsten talked about some as well. It is moving products faster in the hands of customers. Wonderful. But at the same time, our strategies need to align. So we need to think maybe beyond just dev and ops. We need to think about other folks that can take advantage of all the great stuff that comes with DevOps. So that takes us to the workflow. What about the workflow? Well, the workflow is so important because if our workflow isn't efficient, and we're not trying to make people efficient, we're trying to get the workflow efficient so that we can minimize the amount of delay to getting value to our customer. So there's two questions we need to ask. First of all, what do we mean by value? Well, value is anything that helps the customer delight them in some way, brings joy. They're able to use something that helps them in their life, or it's a citizen. We can take it from a government perspective. It helps them in their life, helps them with their family. Perhaps it's medical, healthcare, all sorts of other things. So customer value is the number one thing. Now, of course, as we look at value, there's going to be value in an organization that we're helping each other. We're doing with our stakeholders and our wider community, of course, but also within the organization. That's great too. But ultimately, that value has to touch the customer. And that's the point that we want to think about a little bit. That delay can mean the end for some organizations. A delay of change, a delay of bringing value could cause us to become like a blockbuster, like the dodo bird, basically gone in a few years once changes in the marketplace start to happen. So we're going to spend most of the time thinking about DevOps strategies and what some of those are. Perhaps you're using some or all, but we'll have an opportunity to look at that. So the way we're going to do this is in a review, a little bit about the concept. Then we're going to talk a little bit about a question that we can all basically get together and try a Mentimeter in a second. So that's a piece of software we're going to use to see real time some of the results and then look at those results. And maybe that will help us kind of get an idea of where people are thinking and what they're thinking. So that's the approach we're going to use. Now, first of all, again, this wasn't planned, but I guess because in the book that Willy and I and Matthew wrote, we also referred to where Thorsten referred to that DevOps is a union of people, process, products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. Now, what I'd like you to do, we're going to think about that for a moment, and you either through a browser, so you can go to www.menti.com, excuse me, type in that code you see there, or you can use your phone and either scan the QR code or type it in on your phone. It's very mobile friendly. It actually works really good with mobile. That way you can kind of watch the presentation, do it through that way or through browser. Feel free. So if you can go there now, what I'm going to do is open up the session. And we're going to ask the very first question. So when you get to Mentimeter, again, it's going to be here. We're going to ask the very first question, which is who do we mean by people in DevOps? So based on that little definition there, we're going to think about who do we mean by people in DevOps. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start the countdown in a minute once everybody is in Mentimeter. So is everybody in Mentimeter? Someone isn't and needs help, feel free to raise your hand. But if you're in Mentimeter, that's great. And we're going to just check that everyone's in Mentimeter. You could put in the chat if you're not. So I'm going to assume everybody is in Mentimeter here in a second if I don't see a no yet in the chat. Okay, awesome. So there we go. So this is already up. Excellent. And I'm going to start the countdown. Just go for another 30 seconds or so. Feel free to type in more than one answer if you think. And you can see the answers there. And I'll just put them up here as well. A little bit, didn't want to have everybody anchor too much on this. Okay. Excellent. So we're seeing several people put stakeholders. That's really good. We've got 6 people voting so far, so there's 16 of us. So don't be shy. Okay, good. I know we started a little early, so that's excellent. I'm going to close the voting. So excellent. So we can see that developers is one of the biggest, we think is one of the key people by DevOps, when we mean by people. And also we might think of stakeholders. Excellent. Customer, well done. We've got the customer as well. Operators, engineers, everyone. Somebody put everyone. Well done. Because that is actually, there's no answer that's wrong, by the way. They're all right answers and good answers, but definitely aligned with, when we think about DevOps, everyone can be people, maybe. Let's see if you guys agree as we go through this. Okay, excellent. So that's our first question. So the DevOps vision is kind of the first thing we need to think about, because if we don't have a vision, we're not going to be able to execute against something that we want to plan and then measure and see if that plan is working for us, if we're achieving the goals that we want. And of course, the vision should be something that is unique, because every company and every business is unique. Now, I just want to stop for a second and just, because this is something that was raised with Thorsten and his points. It's around the system. I'm just going to say very quickly what we mean by the system. So Dr. Edwards Deming talked about fixing the system and not the people. So because every business and team has people in it, they're going to be different. Every organization is different. You can see 2 McDonald's and they're different. Even though they got the same M out front and everything else, they're going to be a little bit different. Even if the processes and the rules and the ingredients are similar, they can taste different, even the food. So every business and team is unique. And so just the point about Dr. Deming is he talked about fixing the system, not the people. So we're not trying to change people. We're trying to fix the environment they work in. So a system is your family. It can be a school. That's a system. Your workplace. And sometimes it's a complex system because it's full of people, and a change someplace doesn't necessarily reflect, or we can't necessarily predict those changes. A change isn't reflective in something we can always observe. But that said, every DevOps vision then is going to be different, right? So because of that, we should be thinking that if a DevOps implementation is going to start or continue, we should be asking ourselves, why do we need DevOps? What's the purpose of it? Where's this going? So we should then have a goal, a vision, and a plan to execute our vision. So DevOps vision is really important because we want to align how the organization is working and can accommodate that back up to, of course, the customer or citizen. So let's ask the second question. We're going to go to the next question on Mentimeter. And we're going to start the counter on that. And basically a minute, which parts of the business would we include in our DevOps vision? So we've got different groups that are there. Again, there's not necessarily a wrong or right answer, but let's just see what people think. I'm going to hide the results for a second in case we get too many people voting for the same thing. Let's see what you guys think. We got another 30 seconds before it closes. Okay. 10 seconds coming up here. Sorry, well, but you got now 10 seconds. Okay, so we're going to close the voting now. Excellent. And whoops. And now we're going to show the results. So very interesting. We have got majority said everyone. I don't know if I gave too much away in the previous slide, but awesome. So which part of the business would we want to include in our dev? Absolutely. You guys got it. You guys are, I think I'm done my presentation now. So thank you very much. Well done. So absolutely everyone's involved in that. And it's going to include all parts of the vision, including it should be thinking about our customer citizen, right? Okay. Thank you, Willy, by the way, for putting that up in the chat, that Mentee code. Awesome. Okay, well done. That is absolutely right. So let's move on to, when we think about the DevOps vision, we need to think about the flow a little bit. And we're not going in much into detail about the flow. Again, each one of these kind of points could be easily a 4-hour, half a day, maybe if some of this part here is a full day course that we do on DevOps around flows and stuff. So I know it's a lot to absorb, but if you look at it, you can see pretty much everybody is involved by capabilities. So if we look at each one of these hexes, their capabilities, we have data management, support, IT operations, business operations. Well, of course, who's involved with business operations? HR, people management, right? Marketing, sales, finance. All of these folks are helping supporting the things that need to happen so that the company can deliver products and services. And of course, it's all through that implementation that we get through the design, development, and product out to our customers. So well done. So some people refer to it as biz DevOps, DevSecOps, data DevOps. I don't, I've stopped. Even release management, support, and IT, I say DevOps. It's just easier. It's just 2 words now. So that means everybody. And all of them have some merit. So they should have some conversations and be involved in our DevOps mission and vision. That takes us into the strategy, right? So with the strategy, we've got different strategies. Now, these are not an exhaustive list. There's going to be other strategies that are coming out or you know about that you could add to it. And so that's awesome. First of all, we've got the general strategies that we're going to talk about, teaming strategies and so on. I won't read the slide there, but those are the sections that we're going to talk about today. And there's some other ones that are, like I said, coming out. They're quite interesting. So let's think about the first one, general strategies. What are the strategies that companies should be thinking about, or if they're not a public sector, a city or a government agency? Well, collaborative work, automated dashboards, integrated configuration management, training, education, mentoring, etc. Those are some general strategies, including one team approach. Now, I'm not going to define that for a moment. We're going to go to question 3. So question 3 that we're going to look at is going to help us with this next point. So I got things hidden. We're going to open the open voting, and we're going to start the count. Whoops, on the next one. So which general strategy would you like to talk about? So out of those strategies, we're just going to consider one main one, and we'll just do a quick vote and see which one you want to talk about. Wow, quite a few on number 1. We got a continuous improvement. If there's a tie, I'm gonna have to talk about 2, so that's fine. Okay, 30 seconds. 6. Is this how many people voted? Yeah, I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to vote. Take your time. Okay, so voting is closing now. So continuous improvement, actually that's the shortest definition in here, funny enough, but I will talk a little bit more about it. So excellent, so continuous improvement and collaborative work. I'll break my rule a little bit, I'll talk about those two because there's such a short definition on continuous improvement here, but I can actually elaborate on it. So what do we mean by continuous improvement? Well, first of all, continuous improvement is really focused on teams, and they can be agile, they can be lean, they can be traditional, striving to learn from their experiences as well as from others so that they can continue to improve the way that they work together, including how they approach DevOps. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that when we think about continuous improvement, there's only so much that we might be able to consider for improving on. Consider the fact too that we're also so busy, we're working so hard, we're taking up time that we should probably We've got some time back in travel, for example, that was discussed before. Maybe we should spend more of that time with our families or other things that would be more interesting than work. So that's where we bring in another aspect called guided continuous improvement. Now, guided and continuous improvement is really good because if we looked at, and I don't have a drawing here in front of me, but if we looked at where continuous improvement helps an organization in a short time and over a longer time start to improve. And we know this from so many examples, they do improve. Now, I'm not going to get into frameworks, whether you're using SAFe, Kanban, Lean, Scrum, they're all good. They all have excellent parts to them. But what happens over time is you plateau. So the team will reach a point where even over a longer period of time, they're not quite improving so much. And how do we help them? Guided continuous improvement, GCI. So guided means a coach comes in or a set of coaches helping the team support their continuous improvement. And why? Because they can observe. So let's just think about maybe hockey or any sport, whether it's an Olympic sport or not, there are coaches. Now, why are there coaches? To help observe, bring their experience, of course, in there, but really think about the individual and the team. If it's a team sport like hockey, excel. So those coaches are there to help them. So that's continuous improvement, but we want to add guiding to it. So that's another really important aspect. And of course, that's what the coach should be doing. The coach using lots of different components. I'm thinking here out loud. So a lot of different types of backgrounds and competencies, things like technical, business, instructor or training, different hats they have to wear. And you can find more about that out at the Lisa Adkins model. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about as well is the other point, which is collaborative work, really quickly. So a fundamental philosophy in DevOps is that developers, operations staff, and support people must work closely together. Right? We want to break down those walls, break down those silos. And they should do this regularly. Now, of course, with COVID and situation, maybe it's not happening as much because the process is jumping in. We're out of sight, out of mind type of situation. We've moved the water cooler, so people aren't in front of that water cooler or chat and having just these interesting conversations that turn into discussions that can improve things. So an implication of that is that they must see one another as important stakeholders and actively seek to work together. So notice that's an active. So just like listening, good listeners are active listeners, we need to actively collaborate. And so with that, that means we might want to think of that common practice within an agile community called an on-site customer. Adopting, this is from extreme programming, for example, which motivates agile developers to work closely with the business. So when you are working in DevOps, this one step further, practice of active stakeholder participation is really the next level up of collaboration. And so we're talking about working across our stakeholders, not just business, but operations and other staff as well. And it's a two-way street. So we not only are we active participating in dialogue and communication, but part of that communication is active listener, I said as well. So everybody should be working together to support that. And the only way we can do that is actively come up with ways. And there's lots of different ways, communities of practices, centers of excellence, lean coffees, on and on. There's just so many different things. Good. Okay. So that I'm going to have to move a little bit faster because I took two there, which I broke a rule. Sorry. Okay. So let's talk about teaming DevOps strategies. Moving on to teaming now, there are lots of really good teaming strategies. One of them is this production handoff. Development releases a solution into production and operation takes over. Okay, that sounds interesting. What about warranty period? Well, another DevOps strategy is that the dev team commits to fixing that critical defect for a predefined period of time, and then while the solution is out there, and it's in the hands, in the wild. Another type of teaming DevOps strategy is production support. So that's where the dev team is like this third level support team. Critical production defects are what they work on, but they're still working on new functionality as well. So they're kind of split between stuff that's happening, bugs and critical defects, that third level support team, while putting out new features. Developer-led operations is the fourth one. And they have this you build it you run it model. So dev is responsible for operating and supporting their own solution. Okay, so that takes us to the fourth question that we're going to look at here. And it's something to keep in mind too, that there are always going to be benefits and trade-offs in anything we choose. Whatever strategy or combination of strategy we do, we're going to have some benefits, we're going to have some trade-offs. So let's go back to Mentimeter and let's look at Menti and go to the question 4. Okay, so question 4, we'll start the countdown. Let's see which one of these 4 are approaches that we think is more of a DevOps strategy than the others. Which one do you think is more of a DevOps mindset or line type of strategy? Okay. Interesting. Production handoff. We've got quite a few thinking that, but we still have quite a few thinking about developer-led. Good stuff. 6 voted so far, 7. Okay, 8, good. 10 seconds coming up. Okay, excellent. So the voting's closed. So we can see that the majority, 4.9, said developer-led operations. And you're absolutely right. The developer-led operations is much more aligned to DevOps. Why? Because there are pros and cons to all these, or I said trade-offs, but that build it, you run it approach allows them to focus on arranging themselves and setting the workflows up to handle the features that they're doing, as well as the support. So let's read that out a little bit. So the strategy turns up the dial on production based compared to the other ones by having the development team be responsible for operating and supporting their own solution. So this strategy has benefits that it focuses the team on ensuring that their solution is easy to operate. Now that's interesting. So now they're putting in some additional things, these processes, some people, but tools and technologies too, to help them support and ensure that the most qualified people are the ones evolving the solution. So we want to be enterprise aware. And that's what comes out of this. There's a real good discipline agile principle called being enterprise aware. Because the DevOps team is focusing on supporting their own solution, they become more aware beyond their area and right into the rest of that whole workflow, upstream and downstream as well. So it's really, really good. A lot of good stuff out of that. So developer-led operation strategy does run the risk of varying levels of support quality, as some teams will be better than others. So that, again, people, we need to share, we need to collaborate, we need to run code katas and other things as well. Once again, the teams that are enterprise aware will be following a common set of guidelines, will reach out to other teams to help improving their approach. Again, centers of excellence, communities of practice, other ways to share is a really good thing. Okay, well done. So that's some of the teaming strategies. So let's move into the next question around development strategies. So with development strategies, there's lots, and these are not just the only ones, right? As I said before, there's going to be probably more, it's not an exhaustive list. There's going to be others out there. We've got canary tests, right? Small experiment while new functionality is deployed to a subset of end users. We've got split tests. So that's known also as an A/B test, right? Where we run 2 or more options in parallel so we can see the effectiveness. We can see what people, how they use it, the usability and what they think of it. There's a number of strategies around that, which is great. Automated regression testing. So this is where we want to bring this quality infected. So that's what we're talking about, quality infected, because they're focused on writing quality code and their desire to test early as often as possible. And that's when we get into things like TDD, right? So test-driven development. So we're thinking about making sure that code is well written and we're testing until we pass. So that's set to fail first in that sense too. And that builds more resilient code ultimately. But there's other things around it too, right? In terms of looking at the code and sniffing that code better and looking at ways of making the code functional testing, performance testing, integration testing, etc. And we might even move it up another notch when we get into what's called behavior-driven development. So that's a really good thing as well. But there's going to be trade-offs too, right? Sometimes that might slow down some organizations, or it's a big investment before they can ramp up when they understand BDD a little bit better. So the greater focus on quality is good news for operations, and that insists that solution must be sufficient quality before it goes out to production. So that's a really good point. Continuous integration, CI, that's a discipline of building and validating a project automatically. CI enables developers to develop high quality working solution safely in small regular steps by providing immediate feedback on code defects. So when we're in DevOps, we're doing things in small chunks. We're not doing big chunks because we're trying to get value out sooner. And so CI is this continuous integration that forces us to change a process and think a bit of a mindset to allow CI to propagate and do better. So it does say CI enables developers to develop high quality working solutions. Oh, I already said that, sorry. So that's it. Okay, good. Now we get CD, moving into continuous deployment. That extends the practice more straight into delivery. So with continuous deployment, we're integrating successfully, maybe in a sandbox, maybe into production. There's organizations that do it in production. That's a big step for many. So perhaps it's going to be in pre-prod, or it's going to be another sandbox. But the thing about it is, it's the CI strategy is running this in environment, automatically integrates your solution there, so then you can deploy. And then there's updated source files and all that good stuff that happens as well. Continuous deployment enables development teams to reduce the time between a new feature being identified and being deployed into production. And there's actually some other aspects. It's not just a feature, it could be a fix as well. Successful continuous deployment, or CD, in an enterprise environment requires effective continuous integration strategy in place. So we can't have CD without CI. We need good CI first. Okay, good. Next is development intelligence. So this is the application of data warehouse and BI solution to provide insight on how our delivery teams are doing. What are the metrics? Are we measuring what matters so that we can determine what we need to focus on to improve things? So the automated dashboards are going to be at a team level again, providing many development platforms in a more simple form and way that we can read the information or instrument it in a way that we can see it well. Obviously, a more sophisticated and useful strategy is to combine information from various development tools. Not always easy, right? So this is a great strategy, but it takes time, it takes money and effort, right? And it takes teams coming together and talking about it. Feature access control to support experimentation strategies such as canary tests, split tests. We want to be able to limit end user access to certain functions. So that's another aspect. Self-testing, basically it's, for example, one strategy to make a solution more robust and thus easier to operate is to make it self-testing. So that's a big jump for some. Basic idea behind this is that each component of a solution includes basic tests to validate that it can properly run while in production. So it's adding some of the points that we talked about before in regression and other types of testing there. When a problem is detected, though, it minimally should be logged. Better yet, an alert should be posted if intervention by a person is required. And even better yet, the solution should try and recover from the problem, which is really cool if you can start to do that. And of course, the last one here is self-recovery, which we're getting into, which kind of leads into that. When a system runs into a problem, it can recover. And that's important. So we've seen automation where we're deploying things automatically, and I've lived through this, and then somebody changes something in the script or something, and now something's missed, and now we're knocking over things aren't starting up like they should, etc. When we're doing the automation, we need to think about how do I self-test and self-recover? So some good points. So that takes us to question 5. Which dev practice or DevOps practice are you wanting to work on next? So we put these up there. I did put CI and CD together because you can't have one without the other, to be frank. So let's start the countdown and see what you guys think. Now I'm going to hide the results for a minute, and let's see what you guys are interested in most to start with out of that list. Yeah, Willie had something in the chat as well. Developer-led operations, similar to same as product mindset team. Yes, very much so. There's a little bit subtleties. Maybe we can talk about what we think those subtleties might be, but it might not mean that operations is handling handling some of the operation things. I think we're bringing it more into dev and thinking about the whole piece, but that's the way I understand it, what I've seen, but perhaps I'm wrong. Okay, good. So voting's closed. Let's see the results. Wow. Next, people, we got 4.9 continuous integration and or deployment. So CRCD. Many in looking at self-testing and self-recovery is the next piece. Awesome. Really, really good. Good. There's still quite a few in automated regression and monitoring instrumentation. Excellent. Nice little wide different areas that people are interested in. Very interesting. Okay, well done. Well, thank you for that. Thanks for voting and actively participating. So let's move on to the next strategy, which is the operational strategy. Now, sometimes the developers kind of glaze over this point, but if we're really interested in that DevOps mindset, right, moving into developer-led operations, we want to think about these. So without going into super detail, we're going to be looking at these key strategies, these collection of DevOps strategies. And what we want to think about is, first of all, solution monitoring. So as the name suggests, this is about monitoring running solutions and applications. Well, we should be doing that, right? That is almost, I think, de facto these days. So there's lots of technology that allows us to do that, and we should be doing it. Standard platforms. Now, this is a bane for many, problem for a lot of organizations where things have gone off, virtual machines popping up everywhere, all sorts of things have happened where we don't have necessarily our architecture is evolving too quickly, right? Or we don't have standards and we got legacy and technical debt running around. So standard platforms really is software development practices like CED, initial architecture, envisioning, enable some sort of consistency happening out there with our operational infrastructure. So it's much easier to deploy to a handful of standard hardware than it obviously into a big, huge heterogeneous type of situation. So when you got different versions of operating systems and databases and everything else, they're all very difficult for us to get the changes, the features in, and even the fixes that we want to do out to the systems that need it for the customers. So that's something to think about. So standard platforms, we need to kind of drive that. And automated deployment. Deployment should be automated, not manual. Operations intelligence. Back to the data warehouse business intelligence aspect. We want to bring those operational insights in so that we can have a common view and talk about it and look at it. And should the DevOps people see this? Absolutely. The dev people should be seeing it just like the ops, even the business, so we can make better informed decisions. Good. Now, beyond that, there is another aspect, which is disaster planning. It's all around the disaster recovery and control type of aspects. It's basically what it says on the tin. It's planning for worst case scenarios, right? And then scheduling maybe some sort of planning and testing and validation through disaster simulation. And then you can even go to the next level, which is that random disaster simulation, like a Chaos Monkey. Netflix runs where something just tears something out, so to speak, virtually, I hope. And then we check and see how the systems can handle and recope, self-starting, self-recovery kind of thing. Okay, good. So let's move to the next question, which is, which operational practice is most important to you? So which one do you think it might be? And let's take a look. You know what? Let's just watch these results too. Interesting. I don't think you guys are anchoring too much off each other. So. Oh, they're hidden. Sorry, I said that. And they're still hidden. That's weird. Show results. There we go. Wondering why the bars weren't moving, but people were voting. Okay. 10 seconds left coming up. So we can clearly see that number one is automated deployments. That's very interesting. Deployment testing, all of them. That's good. All of them perhaps are something we should be thinking about. The question would be is when would you not use one? Why would I not use one? Maybe your organization doesn't give you the ability to do it yet, but is it something you would like to do? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, well done. Thank you so much for that. So automated deployments. That is what you guys want to focus on. Really excellent, most important. Okay, so let's get into some support DevOps strategies. Again, this is just to highlight them. Much of the same, in terms of on the tin, so to speak. So these things like online information, obviously people need access to things and see it. Artificial intelligence, chatbots, those are great. Purposely interact with AI. Some people don't like them, some people do. It's funny, we have a chat on our website and people think we're a bot. It's always a live person, except after hours, it just says, there's nobody here right now. Please leave your name and number. We'll get back to you. But it's funny because we've had people ask a question and we start responding and they go, oh, you're just a bot, and hang up. So they can be good or maybe not so good sometimes. But anyways, there's some of that online discussion forums, asynchronous support. So that's when synchronous support strategies like a customer puts in a request and later somebody gets back to them. Synchronous is when we can do it live, right? So it's contact support people in real time. Okay, next, support alerts, etc., and sandboxes. So those are a collection of help desk practices. They're important, and we want to include that in our DevOps vision and strategy. Next is release management. So release management is really, really important. So we've got the release windows, that's slow cadence type of situation. A lot of companies do that. Most do actually, where we're releasing a said feature in a period of time into production. So there's a window that they have to hit. If they don't hit that window, then perhaps they miss it. Then we've got a release train. The idea with the release train is that a common teams involved with that train has the same release cadence. So for example, a release train that goes once a quarter, or once a month, or even a week, people would need to ensure that they were on that train or get their feature onto that train. It's commonly used a lot of times with large programs or teams of teams, scrums of scrums, where an individual teams are each working on a part of a solution and they want to roll the whole thing out. Primary disadvantage of this, though, is that development teams are constrained to a common release schedule, making it difficult to support a lean or continuous delivery strategy. Not always, but sometimes. Okay, and so that's one. Now, what about the release windows quick? That is to support continuous deployment, particularly across many delivery teams. So when you're moving to a release window that's quick cadence, it's actually a pretty good strategy in a lot of respects. So the advantage of a quick cadence release window is that they're less likely to suffer from bottleneck challenges associated with a slow cadence release window and release trains. And then there's the continuous release availability. So that's moving into a 24/7. That's that continuous delivery all the time, really what we're getting into it. So where it's one up from the release window, quick cadence, and the strategy supports that continuous delivery aspect. To make it work, a host of DevOps practices have to be in place. We need a level of maturity, a level of automation needs to be there, and really a level that we say is pretty much fully automated. Okay, with fully automated regression testing, feature toggles, self-recovery components, and many other aspects of DevOps. So a lot of companies are in the slow cadence release window. We're still seeing there's the next step, obviously, is quick cadence, and then maybe to use another type of strategy that might work. And you might use a combination of strategies, perhaps, depending on how your organization is set up. So which RM strategy or release management strategy do you use today? So let's have a quick vote on that. And let's see. First of all, we've got release train seems to be, of course, we have one vote. So let's see how many people are thinking about release train versus something else, or that you're doing, sorry. So while we're voting for another 20 seconds, I would be remiss not to mention some scheduling strategies around technical releases. So integrated deployment planning. Deployment planning has always required interaction with organizations, operations, and release management staff. So that liaison and that discussion and coming together is super important. So that's another strategy. It is built into Discipline Agile in a lot of ways. So that's one good thing. And a lot of other frameworks talk about it, SAFe, et cetera. So that's really important. Okay, so this is closed. Well done. So number one is release. Okay, interesting. So the results we got is what we've read on the website and what we've seen in our discussions and interaction with our customers as well. So that's what we've seen out there. Looks like it's pretty much up to date and still the case. There's something around release service streams. So that is every team is unique, as we talked about. So that means some teams will need more help than others. So teams will produce different levels of quality and they will have different amounts of automation. So release service streams is being flexible enough to address the different situations. So one way to do that is to have these different service streams or service levels, as it were, and that means that our solution delivery teams, we're going to be working in that direction, such as having a basic release management service stream where release management engineers actively help deliver teams to deploy their solutions into production and even help them start automating some of the processes. So that's a release service stream. So there's some good things there. And of course, blackout periods, we know that's common practice. Remember at Heathrow, we had blackout periods, but never was it 100% blackout. If there's emergency, all bets are off, right? We move on to getting that fix out there. Now we can't not talk about data. I mean, data management is so important. It's so key to whatever we do. Data is always involved. I can't think of an app or business process that we don't interact with some data. So data and information guidelines, that's pretty straightforward. Quality data sources and self-service business intelligence. So that's interesting. So the self-service business intelligence, SSBI, is the creation, support, evolution, and operation of data warehouse solutions that support decision-making across this organization. So that could be connected to maybe a center of excellence. And the SSBI is where the business intelligence, predictive analytics aspects, where end users have access to those tools. They can learn more about them, or they have access to a person, a professional, a subject matter expert to help them in their particular project or solution. And then that way they get skilled up so that they can support their own data analysis and decision-making. So we have a little picture here around enterprise architecture that's evolving the architecture with the business and with IT, the rest of IT. And then we've got data management that's connected, obviously, through really important. Not only are we getting data, managing data from the solution itself, but we need to get data about the solution we created. So it's a feedback loops that are going both ways. And of course, we need to govern that data too, especially with data protection and privacy and all the other aspects. Governance is key. So let's ask the last question, which is, are you able to implement data DevOps in your organization today? So let's see what the consensus is. Let's start the countdown. And from Jens, none of the above at this time. That's sadly is the case for a lot. So I'm sorry about that. Maybe we can help. Maybe we can chat after. Have a coffee. I need to come over to Vancouver. And then I'll answer some of the questions here in a second. Get back to RM strategy in a second. Okay, about 10 seconds while you're thinking of that. So on the RM strategy, I think it would be the release windows quick, right? 2-week agile sprints, that might work. If your agile release train is set to 2 weeks, and of course, jump in our expert Willy as well, if you can add anything to this, but you might want to use release trains. It just means everybody needs to be on that common cadence of 2 weeks. which I know isn't a lot of times the case. So maybe the release windows, quick release windows, so they can release in a window that fits that 2-week. Did you want to add anything, Willy?
Not add, just to get the common cadence across the organization was quite a challenge, but it's the one thing you need to do to get this right. And then, yes, I agree with you. It's a release train, and that's typically the 2-week iteration.
Yeah, I've never been able to get organizations to do it because we say every team's different, et cetera. But there's a lot of benefits to moving to release trains. When we get in ARTs, it's a little bit more advanced, and there's a little bit more flexibility. But yeah, there is a lot of benefits if you can get people to common cadence for sure. No doubt about that. Awesome. So sometimes hit and miss. Good. That's good. That's progress. The key thing here is we need to bring data in terms of the architects, the DBAs, et cetera. I keep harping on this for a number of years. Well, since I've been here in 2016. The fact that I go in so often into these kickoffs, project initiation, inception phase, where we're talking about backlogs and we're talking about data, and there isn't the experts in the room. So one of the things we've been able to do with one ministry some time ago when we were doing some low code stuff is we brought the data architects in early. Yes, they had big, thick volumes of guidelines, but still we were able to actually ramp up and deliver things where leaving it to later on would have been much more challenging. Okay, so everybody's situation is going to vary, but that's just something I've noticed over the years. So that takes us to the security aspect. So we just got 2 more of this one, security management. Again, these are standard. I cannot see why any organization wouldn't be trying to do all of these. All these strategies are really important. You might not be able to get it done right away, but it'd take time, but building rugged software, right? So there has to be a mindset behind it. If we build ruggedized software, we are making software less penetrable, smarter software, and that's good. And it can handle various situations. Moving towards that rugged software. Operations set, automated separation of duties. Again, depending on your organization, what you do, you may have to do that because of ISO or other regulative legislative things. Collaborative security engineers, exploit testing, real-time monitoring. These are really important. Now on the right, I have a goal diagram. So in Discipline Agile, we use goals, decisions, and options. And sometimes you want to use more than one option. These are all options that are good. And there's sometimes better ones. You choose, you decide which one, but ultimately it should hit a goal that you're trying to do. So that's why the goal diagram is there to remind us about that. So that leads us into the last strategy, which is enterprise architecture DevOps strategy, the enterprise architecture piece. A little tongue-in-cheek thing from Martin Fowler, technical debt quadrant. So one thing about enterprise architecture, being enterprise aware, is we want to avoid or at least start to pay down that technical debt. And you can't always avoid, we make decisions, but as long as they're conscious decisions, that's good. So when it's reckless, you're kind of going, what is layering? What is data normalization? What's user experience? That's kind of like inadvertent and reckless. Deliberate, we don't have time for architecture. We don't have time for design. Well, you will find out that you'll pay for that. You will pay for that a lot. We must ship now and deal with the consequences. Now we know how we should have done it. That's prudent. So we've learned, let's go in. Maybe it's an MVP, right? We're just seeing if this is the right thing. But we want to use the right mindset. So an enterprise architecture mindset includes this reuse mindset. Reuse what we can. Looking at the technical debt, as I said, development guidelines. Let's support the developers. Let's support the operations. Let's bring some guidelines so there's some consistency. But obviously, they are the most important stakeholder from those guidelines. We need to bring in a governance in there. And of course, roadmaps are super important. If we don't have a roadmap, it's hard for people to decide what's the right path to take. Are we hitting the strategy that we should be doing? So one of the DA principles is enterprise aware. It's key for DevOps to succeed. And that is, I think, a true statement. Ultimately, there's going to be benefits of DevOps. Apologies for the eye chart here. It's a little bit of one, but the benefit is decreased time to market when we put these strategies in place, right? I don't have to sell you folks. You guys love DevOps. You are interested in DevOps. But in order for us to hit those benefits, can you see where deploying some or employing some of those strategies or many of those strategies are going to help us absolutely get those benefits? Well, I hope so. So where do we go from here? Well, these are just a brief overview of those strategies. There's a couple places and there's lots of good books. I got to do a sell here. So our DevOps book that Willy, myself, and Matthew Matai wrote really gets into the mindset. I think Jens was at our book launch. Thank you very much. It's a good book. It's a bit of a story, and it's got some great strategies in there as well. Along with that is a critical success factor. So what are the critical success factors? We can maybe talk about that in the future, but it's 3 that are listed there, and you'll have access to the video, so you'll be able to review these. Ultimately, I want to send you a link. So first of all, I'm going to put this up. Everything I showed here should come back to this mindset. And the mindset that I go back to all the time that we teach is the discipline agile mindset. So delighting our customers. But you'll notice if we organize around products and services, we're moving to those value streams, right? Optimizing the flow. So the strategies we're talking about definitely touch on principles, the promises, like psychological safety that we talked about earlier, accelerating value realization, keeping workloads within capacity, and then guidelines like semi-autonomous self-organizing teams, right? Leveraging, enhancing organizational assets from an enterprise awareness point of view. Create effective environments that foster joy, fixing the system. That's what we got to get to. So with that, I will send you one more chat. This is where I got all the information from for tonight, so you can look at your own time. And one last slide, which is how to reach me. So there you go. If you guys would like to reach, we're literally across the water. I do go to Vancouver every now and then, so happy to meet you over there as well at some point. Please reach out, have a chat. We'd love to hear from you. And I think that's it from me, Willy, and everybody else.
Thank you very much, Brent. It's a really great session, and I really enjoyed the interactive polls. Was surprised by some of them, but
Thank you. And then not surprised too. There's a few I was like, yeah.
I'm not surprised. Probably one of the sessions we can talk about in the future is that the question I asked, developer-led operations. That sounded to me very similar to our move from project to product mindsets, where the team is really responsible for the solution from ideation till it's deprecated forever.
Yes, sorry, I'm
but
just trying to
it's a longer discussion. So maybe when you pop over to
Sure.
Vancouver next time, we can have a burger and a chat.
Absolutely. I'd love to.
Susan, are you still on the call? And if yes, were you surprised by the database responses?
Yeah.
I
think it's interesting.
mean, what's your experience with the database releases in our DevOps environment?
Well, it's definitely gotten better. We've definitely shifted left to get the DBAs and information modelers involved earlier. Then it saves so much time versus, oh, you did that? What are you doing that? That doesn't work. That's not going to perform well. So I've been pleased with a lot of the pods that have shifted to get us engaged early.
And I guess that's a trick again, get engaged early, which ... the product mindset.
Yeah. Definitely. The more we see product, the better. I think it's their thought more for the long haul, not just, oh, project, we'll do it. We got sometimes two PIs they do for a project, and then on to the next one. And yeah, I like this is where I started out in IT. It was more product based, so it's really nice to see the shift.
Yeah, everything comes back. The mainframe with the terminals disappeared, and
thankfully
cloud data centers come back. At least no green screens.
Yeah, I didn't like the amber either. I'm old, sorry.
Right, any other questions or ideas or comments on the sessions and or how we can improve the next meetup?
For folks who are shy, please feel free to hit us up online and share your comments as well. We're always very eager to know whether this was valuable to you and if, how we could go about creating more sessions that would provide more value.
No, I actually have a question then. So I'm still a BCIT student right now, but actually I just got into the co-op program. So currently I'm looking for a job, and many of my teachers and instructors have been telling me that I have really good communication. So they actually recommended me to try to apply for a DevOps job. So I was wondering, from both Brent's and Thorsten's presentation, like they gave me a lot of details. Like I knew some information from many classes such as CI/CD or continuous integration and continuous development. I knew some of these terms, but there's a lot of stuff that I really don't know. Do you guys have any tips or like tricks, maybe just to maybe help me find a job into DevOps?
So have you checked through your school? Is there a co-op program that your school can help you or help students that are looking for a co-op internships and things like that?
Yeah, so that's the program I actually got into. So they are trying to help me through the summer and also through September and October to find a job by January. So if I do get a job, I'll take a 8-month break to work full time, and then I will resume my education back in September.
Okay. Feel free to reach out. You've got my information. We've had a number of interns. In fact, we had a DevOps intern back just pre-COVID, and then she moved over to Vancouver and she has a DevOps job over there. Jay, who used to work with us. I don't know if you met Jay, Willy. She'd help with the training coordination, and she was we were doing low code stuff. So basically Dynamics in 365. And so I was training her up on that and automating some of the things with that and working on some of my DevOps projects. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to have a chat. And if there's anything I can pass on, I will. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think as much information and detail I can get will kind of guide me into where I kind of want my IT career to be, all that stuff. Yeah, so thanks for that comment.
There are also a handful of good, depending on which element of DevOps you're interested in, there are a handful of good free online courses that might supplement whatever course material you've had at PCIT. There's an Azure DevOps a learning module. I think Coursera has a pretty good introduction course. There was a Udemy course a couple of years ago that was a fairly good introduction. But it depends which element of the life cycle you're wanting to learn about DevOps. Some of the techniques we're talking about here are DevOps for larger and more mature organizations that have gone through, often they've been through Agile, and they're looking for that next step in velocity. And so some of the concepts, the reason you won't necessarily hear about them in some of the earlier courses is because they require the institution to mature almost as much as they've required the developers, the participants, the engineers to mature.
Okay, so I mean, I'm not really familiar with DevOps, but like so there's many different sections or sectors of DevOps. Is that what you're trying to say?
So on a DevOps team, you expect a DevOps team like an Agile team to be able to do everything it needs to do, but there are a lot of things that need to be done. And so usually you have different people bringing different skills to the table. So depending who you are and what kind of role you're wanting to play on that DevOps team, people are naturally better at some things than others. They've learned more about some things than others. So as you're starting a journey, it's understanding what are the skills you bring to the table, what are you good at, what are your passions. And so as you participate in a DevOps team, where would you be a contributor and where would you be just learning and just absorbing and then contributing later on as you move through that journey?
Okay, I understand. So like trying to build up my skills maybe in one certain aspect, maybe like programming or maybe product management, could really help me, find my purpose in a DevOps team.
Yeah, and we talk a lot when we talk about developing DevOps people is we're turning them into broader people. They often started being very deep in one particular area, and as they participate on a DevOps team, they start to learn more. But it's often good to have a deep skill that you can contribute as you build the broader skills that the rest of your DevOps team might be imparting to you.
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense. All right, thank you.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to Jens' comment. If you're, say, developer might be a big switch or something you'd have to spend a lot of time at, maybe focusing on a Scrum Master team lead type role where you're working with the team. If you're really good at coordinating and collaborating and communicating, those are awesome assets that you've already got. And you can take the, relatively short courses. Experience is the best teacher, obviously. But you could, maybe start working with the teams and then through that decide, oh, as a team lead, a Scrum Master, yeah, I'd like to be more on the user side of things. So user experience, maybe go into UX or developer, or maybe tester, data, or even a product owner, which is looking at working with all the stakeholders to figure out what we're going to do so that you can help the team decide how long it's going to take and how to do it. So that's, there's roles within DevOps that touch agile lean practices, as Jens said, and you can start with very little coding experience. It's a bonus if you've got development and operations experience, of course, but you don't necessarily have to have a lot to start the journey and to start working in that.
Okay, and then, as I'm looking for a job, in the greater Vancouver area, are there any companies that enjoy hiring DevOps interns and all that stuff? I mean, starting now, I don't start my co-op job finding until September, but starting early really doesn't hurt. So I know like many major companies like SAP and ICBC are hiring students at BCIT for co-op, but I haven't found anything for DevOps. Do you guys recommend any companies or businesses?
I'd have to go reach out through my network and see. I do see things pop up all the time from LinkedIn. So like I said, feel free to reach out and send me your details. And yeah, I can talk to a few people. I know they're always looking for interns. Startups are looking for interns as well, like, 10 to 20 people kind of works. Yeah, so there's opportunities. But it's usually through networking. I don't know if anyone else another suggestion, but that's what I was gonna.
Yeah, that's why I kind of came to this meeting. I mean, especially like networking for other people, especially everyone in this group. Mainly you guys have a lot of experience in the sector. So I really just want your opinion and all that stuff.
Mhm.
One of the things you might find a little challenging is I think there's an assumption, and that to be a DevOps practitioner, you have to have years of skill in whatever area you're coming from. And I think that's more of a reflection on where the state of DevOps in the industry, and that it tends to be you've gone through a bunch of other experiences, and then you call yourself a DevOps person because you've tried a bunch of stuff and failed at a bunch of stuff, and finally you realize there must be a better way. And so I think a lot of organizations, when they're looking for DevOps professionals, they're looking on the more skilled side. So they wouldn't necessarily be looking for interns. That's not to say there aren't some companies that are doing that, but that might be why, if you're looking specifically for intern positions, they wouldn't necessarily mention DevOps, just because I think there is a little bit of that bias that, oh, to be a DevOps person, you have to already know how to walk on water.
Yeah, especially when I'm thinking about DevOps, programming, communication, teammates, collaboration. It's really challenging, especially like as an intern where you have no experience in the IT sector. So DevOps may be a really hard job for me to find an internship in, but especially kind of like finding a job, at least in the IT sector, is just the best thing for me right now.
Yeah, getting your foot in the door is step number one. Roles might change because you have like a really long career in front of you, and most people you will talk to in this industry and in other industries, you'll see that they kind of change their career trajectory a couple of times. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I see some really good resources in the chat over here. So yeah, please do feel free to click through some of these seemingly useful courses.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot in the chat, so I will definitely read all of them. And Willy, I will definitely follow you on LinkedIn as well.
Excellent.
I
And it's 8.
I have a question if we still have time.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. So I know that DevOps is more like a culture, right? Rather than just a technical practice or something like that. But I would like to ask if, for example, let's say that I am coming into a new team that doesn't have any DevOps practices. Which kind of practices do you think could be like quick wins to start making impact in the team as a DevOps practitioner in a team that doesn't have any DevOps foundations?
I want everyone to jump in at once. I mean, so, a lot of times, and I don't think this is good. A lot of times companies say, we want to try DevOps. Let's do a proof of concept, just like Agile. I don't agree with it. I think it's silly. Millions of companies, people are doing it, and so we don't need to prove it anymore. It's not a proof of concept. So where do we start? Typically start where you are. That means there's a process. You start with a vision, as I said. Why do you want to have DevOps? What is DevOps going to bring to your organization? Is it going to bring something faster to your customer value? Great. Well, then understand how you're doing things today and look at, and it's a combination of a mindset and culture, principles behind it. It's going to include changing your way of working a bit. And as the people change their way of working to collaborate better, to concentrate on doing things in small chunks, small batches, they're going to be looking at the processes and the tools as well. So that's where you get into the processes to accommodate like visibility of our workflow, how we communicate with our ops people. Have we got working agreements with our ops people? if we don't have explicit working agreements, it's difficult to have a real good DevOps culture because we don't know what the expectations are, or it's unsaid, and then that creates all sorts of things. So there's a lot of places we can start wherever you are and focus on that to ultimately get to your DevOps vision and find the right strategies with the various teams to do that. But again, it starts with, why do you want to have DevOps? Are you, and I'll tell you, number one thing is your leadership must be behind it. Your leaders must be wanting to be involved in that strategy. If it's starting with a small group, sure, you can make a little inroads, you can start to do some good things, but it won't extend, and you definitely won't change the culture of the organization. The culture of the organization always starts with the leaders setting the example and the teams following that and working with that and having the ability to change and adopt new practices and tailor it. So there isn't here's a blueprint to DevOps being successful. I know there's companies that sell that. The answer is that it doesn't exist. They can go buy these things and it never comes out like the blueprint, but you can take examples from it and tailor it and use the lessons learned based on your situation and adapt it to work for you. But it starts with development and operations having a conversation for sure. That would be the first place I'd start. And how effective is your team creating that value, software service, and getting it to your customer, and look at how that path works. We call it value streams when we start looking at the details around that and look at the processes and everything else.
I fully agree. It's very much organizational specific and team specific. For some teams, if they, for example, been doing agile and they want to take those next steps, then leaning heavily on automation is a great thing. But for other organizations, they don't even have an agile foundation. They don't, and so things like making work visible, right? Starting to write team agreements. So it really very much depends where your team is at. But I think approaching it with an open and a learning mindset, as an individual, that's the best thing you can do, being inquisitive. And realizing that it all comes down to metrics, measuring, and improving. And so if you understand what your processes are, if you can understand the state of your processes today, and you can think, all right, what's the next step I can do to improve it? Is it, again, a human process I need to improve? Is it a computer process I need to improve? Is it an approval? Just start to think about what are the processes that I'm using from whether it's people and policy driven, whether it's technology driven, and how could I instrument that to understand how those processes are working, and how can I start to improve those processes? You're on mute, Brent.
Yeah, and read this book. So are you around Vancouver, David?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll check with Willy because I still have more copies, so I can bring over. We got to meet for a burger and a beer anyway, so I'll just bring some more books if he needs a few more. But honestly, I'll give it to you. Like, you can have this for, and Willy, if he's got copies, he'd give it to you. The bottom line is, if you read this book, it's going to help give you some direction. It's going to give you some scenarios of how DevOps. What it definitely isn't, and how you can get there with some scenarios. Just like Yen said, it's all back to measuring what matters. So let's figure out what we need to fix. Challenges and opportunities, just as Thorsten talked about, it's all about that. And I have to say, and again, I'm not trying to sell anything, but that's why Jens does it. I do this. We coach, we guide companies. That's what it's about. Part of it is training, and then part of it, the education part, is putting part of it, and then there's the practice part. We have to start back to, what do we want to change? What do we want to start doing, and what do we want to stop doing? And that's where it really, really starts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a total sense. One of the hardest things, I will say, it is trying to, because sometimes companies wants to have certain KPIs, wants to measure certain KPIs that actually at the end doesn't make sense. In trying to establish a more metrics that have more sense in terms of what we really want to achieve as an outcome, it is difficult. So yeah, if that book has this kind of scenarios, I will say that it is totally worth it. Take a look to it. Yeah, thanks. It is my first time in this meetup, so thanks everyone.
Welcome.
Welcome, David. And yeah, touch base with me on LinkedIn. I'm on the side of the pond. I've also got a few spare copies, so I'll make sure that you get one. Just ping me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, can I have your LinkedIn link? I don't know if it's in the chat. Sorry. Thanks.
Right, Jay, I think it's time to pull the plug. 9 minutes past. We want everybody to unplug their machines and go out for a walk, work life.
Sounds like a great plan.
First of all, thank you very much, Brent. Thank you very much, Thorsten, for really interesting and insightful sessions. And thank you, everybody, for hanging out this long.
Yeah, good sessions today.
If you have any questions, ping me on LinkedIn, and we'll see you again in September sometime. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Thanks
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you. Thanks.